What if I told you that in one war, over 17 million people lost their lives? That means, on average, nearly 30,000 people died every day for 6 full years. Even more shocking, the vast majority of the victims were not soldiers, but civilians who had never even held a weapon. This is the story of World War II, the deadliest conflict humanity has ever experienced. When most people hear the words World War II, they immediately imagine German tanks, fighter jets, or the atomic bombings of Japan. But all of that is only a small part of a much larger story. World War II was more than just a battle between great powers. It was a global humanitarian catastrophe, involving over 100 million military personnel, destroying thousands of cities, displacing tens of millions, and leaving scars that are still felt today. To this day, historians still disagree on the exact number of casualties. Many documents were lost, much of the world was completely destroyed, and millions of people were never officially reported. However, most modern studies estimate that between 70 and 85 million people died as a result of this war. That number equates to about 3% of the world's population at the time. The figure is so enormous it's hard to fathom. If all the victims of World War II formed a single country, it would be one of the largest in the world by population. But behind these numbers are human stories. There are children who lost their parents, families vanished overnight, cities reduced to rubble, and generations living with trauma for decades. It all began on the morning of September 1, 1939. Without warning, Nazi German troops under Adolf Hitler invaded Poland from multiple directions. Thousands of tanks moved swiftly across the border. Warplanes bombarded railway lines, bridges, and key cities. The strategy known as Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, brought the Polish defenses to their knees in just a matter of weeks. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. In an instant, a regional conflict turned into a war involving almost the entire world. But in its early stages, few could have imagined that this war would become the greatest tragedy in human history. During the first few years, Germany continued to expand its territory. Denmark fell in a matter of hours. Norway was occupied. Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg could not hold out for long. Then came an event that shocked the world. France, one of Europe's greatest military powers, was defeated in just about 6 weeks. The Nazi flag flew over Paris. Many believed that Germany was unstoppable. On the other side of the world, Japan was also expanding its power in Asia. In fact, Japan's war against China had begun in 1937, long before the outbreak of war in Europe. In various cities, fighting was extremely brutal. One of the most horrific tragedies occurred in Nanjing, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were victims of massacres and violence that shook the world. Over time, the two major conflicts, in Europe and Asia, eventually merged into one global war. The oceans became battlefields. The skies were filled with bombers. Factories were diverted to weapons production day and night. Children worked in place of men sent to the front. The world economy was transformed. No continent was completely safe from its impact. What made World War II different from previous wars was the advancement of technology. Tanks became faster. Aircraft could travel thousands of kilometers. Submarines attacked unseen. Radar began to be used. Rockets were developed. And for the first time in history, civilian cities became the primary targets of aerial bombardment. Whereas previously battles had largely been fought on the front lines, now even people's homes had become battlefields. Air raid sirens became a familiar sound in many cities. People slept in underground bunkers. Schools were closed. Hospitals were overflowing with casualties. Famine began to spread. In many occupied territories, food became scarce. Millions died not from bullets or bombs, but from food shortages, disease, and the collapse of health systems. Ironically, the longer the war lasted, the greater the number of civilian casualties compared to military casualties. This is what made World War II the deadliest war in history. The victims were not only those fighting, but also newborn babies, elderly people unable to flee, medical personnel, teachers, farmers, and even ordinary families caught in the middle of the conflict. And all that was just the beginning. The war that began in 1939 would become even more horrific when Germany launched the largest invasion in history of the Soviet Union, when concentration camps began to operate systematically, and when the world witnessed unprecedented mass slaughter. In the next section, we will examine how the Eastern Front became the greatest hell in the history of warfare, why the Soviet Union lost tens of millions of its citizens, and how the Holocaust claimed millions of lives simply because of their identity. Because understanding the toll of World War II isn't just about counting numbers. It's about remembering every life lost so that a tragedy of this magnitude can never be repeated. With most of Western Europe already in German hands, Adolf Hitler made a decision that would change the course of the war and herald the greatest humanitarian catastrophe in history. In the early hours of June 22, 1941, more than 3 million German and Allied troops crossed the Soviet Union's borders. This operation, dubbed Operation Barbarossa, is still remembered as the largest land invasion ever undertaken by mankind. More than 3,500 tanks, some 7,000 cannons, and nearly 3,000 fighter planes moved simultaneously along thousands of kilometers of front lines. The goal was clear: to destroy the Soviet Union as quickly as possible before winter set in. In the first weeks, German troops advanced with incredible speed. City after city fell. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers were surrounded. Many died, while millions more became prisoners of war. But Hitler made a major mistake. He expected the Soviet Union to surrender within just a few months. The opposite happened. As winter set in, temperatures in many regions dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Tank engines froze. Vehicles struggled to start. Food and fuel supplies dwindled. The summer uniforms worn by many German soldiers were no protection against the deadly cold. Winter became as dangerous an enemy as bullets. Meanwhile, the Soviet people chose to resist at all costs. Factories were dismantled, moved thousands of kilometers east, and then resumed production. Women, teenagers, and even the elderly made ammunition, assembled tanks, and supported the front lines. The war was no longer just a struggle for territory, but a struggle for survival. One of the greatest symbols of suffering was the siege of Leningrad. For nearly 900 days, the city was under relentless siege. Food lines were cut off. Supplies ran out. Winter came with freezing temperatures. Starvation became the primary killer. People ate bread mixed with sawdust. Glue from the walls was boiled for food. Pets disappeared from the streets, eaten for survival. It is estimated that over 1 million civilians died during the siege, mostly from starvation and extreme weather, not from enemy fire. But the suffering on the Eastern Front had not yet reached its peak. Behind the front lines, the Nazi regime carried out a systematic program of extermination. The world would later know it as the Holocaust. Millions of Jews were hunted simply because of their identity. They were forced to flee their homes, separated from their families, and shipped in crowded train cars to concentration and extermination camps. Upon arrival, many were immediately segregated. Those deemed incapable of work, children, the elderly, and some women, were often killed immediately. Beyond Jews, victims also included Romani, people with disabilities, Soviet prisoners of war, resistance groups, and other groups deemed enemies by the Nazi regime. In total, approximately 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Combined with other victim groups, the number of victims of the Nazi extermination policy reaches millions. The Holocaust was no momentary outburst of anger. It was a planned crime, with bureaucracy, administration, transportation, and industry working in an organized manner. This is one reason why the Holocaust is remembered as one of the most horrific crimes against humanity in modern history. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, fighting continued to claim unprecedented casualties. The Battle of Stalingrad was the turning point of the war in Europe. For months, both sides fought house to house, floor to floor, and even room to room. The city was reduced to a sea of rubble. It is estimated that over 2 million casualties, including both soldiers and civilians, occurred in this battle. Many historians call it the bloodiest battle in human history. When German forces finally surrendered at Stalingrad in early 1943, the world began to realize that Nazi power was no longer invincible. However, this victory came at a terrible price. Overall, the Soviet Union suffered the greatest number of casualties in World War II. Various studies estimate that between 24 and 27 million people died, including millions of soldiers and civilians. Many of the casualties were caused by combat, bombing, starvation, disease, and massacres in occupied territories. Poland also suffered tremendously. Between 5 and 6 million people died, nearly a fifth of its pre-war population. Most were civilians, including approximately 3 million Polish Jews who were victims of the Holocaust. Meanwhile, Germany itself lost millions of soldiers on various fronts. By the end of the war, major cities like Berlin, Dresden, and Hamburg had been devastated by fighting and intense aerial bombing. Ironically, a war started to expand power ended up destroying the very country that started it. In 1944, the balance of the war began to shift. Allied forces landed in Normandy from the west, while the Red Army continued to push German forces from the east. The Nazis were now caught between two great powers. But as Europe slowly approached the end of the war, millions of people in Asia were still living in the midst of an equally brutal conflict. On the Pacific front, Japan and the Allies engaged in a fierce battle that would lead to two of the most infamous explosions in history, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was there that the death toll of World War II would rise dramatically again. While Europe began to see a glimmer of hope after Germany's defeat at Stalingrad, in other parts of the world, millions of people remained trapped in an equally horrific war. The battlefield stretched from China to the Pacific Islands, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the vast oceans teeming with warships. For many Asians, World War II had actually begun much earlier. In 1937, Japan launched a massive invasion of China. City after city fell, and millions of civilians died. The fighting lasted 8 years, making it one of the longest conflicts of World War II. China subsequently suffered the second highest death toll after the Soviet Union. Various studies estimate that between 15 and 20 million Chinese died from fighting, massacres, starvation, disease, and bombing. Tens of millions more were left homeless and forced to flee. In occupied territories, villages were burned, crops looted, and infrastructure destroyed. For civilians, the greatest threat was not just bullets, but also starvation and disease that spread as the health system collapsed. Meanwhile, Japan's ambitions continued to expand into Southeast Asia. Areas rich in oil, rubber, tin, and other natural resources became primary targets. Within a short time, Hong Kong, Malaya, the Philippines, Burma, Singapore, and even the Dutch East Indies were occupied. In early 1942, Japanese troops landed in the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia. The Dutch colonial government collapsed within weeks. For some Indonesians, the Japanese arrival was seen as the beginning of the end of Western colonialism. However, this hope was short-lived. In reality, the Japanese occupation brought new suffering. Hundreds of thousands of people were forced to work as ramusha. They were sent to build roads, railways, airfields, and even defense fortifications, not only in Indonesia but also throughout Southeast Asia. They worked under extremely harsh conditions, faced shortages of food, inadequate medical care, and often experienced violence. Many died from starvation, tropical diseases, work accidents, or exhaustion. The exact number of ramusha victims remains debated, but estimates range from hundreds of thousands to hundreds of thousands. In many parts of Indonesia, people also experienced food crises. Agricultural production declined, food distribution was disrupted, and harvests were prioritized for Japan's war effort. As a result, widespread famine spread across the region. Similar suffering was experienced by people in Burma, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaya. In some places, the war devastated the economy, leaving millions of people without a livelihood in a short time. However, the turning point in the war in the Pacific came in mid-1942. In the Battle of Midway, the United States sank for major Japanese aircraft carriers. This defeat dealt a major blow to the Imperial Japanese Navy, which had previously dominated the Pacific. From then on, the Allies began recapturing island after island through a strategy known as island hopping. Each island became a bloody battlefield. Many Japanese garrisons chose to fight to the death rather than surrender. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa are the most glaring examples. Thousands of soldiers died fighting for relatively small areas of territory. Civilians also suffered casualties amidst artillery and air raids. At the same time, the United States intensified its strategic bombing campaign against Japanese cities. B-29 bombers dropped a massive number of conventional bombs. One of the deadliest raids occurred on Tokyo on the night of March 9 to 10, 1945. Incendiary bombs ignited a firestorm that engulfed residential areas. In a single night, an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 people died, making it one of the deadliest air raids in history. But the world had yet to see the most devastating weapon ever created by mankind. On the morning of August 6, 1945, an American bomber dropped the first atomic bomb used in war over the city of Hiroshima. Within seconds, temperatures at the center of the explosion reached millions of degrees. The shockwave destroyed buildings within a wide radius. Thousands of people near the epicenter died instantly. Those who survived faced severe burns, radiation exposure, and previously unknown diseases. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. It is estimated that approximately 140,000 people died in Hiroshima by the end of 1945, while approximately 70,000 died in Nagasaki during the same period. Many more died in the following years from cancer, leukemia, and radiation-related complications. This event not only ended the war but also opened a new chapter in human history, the era of nuclear weapons. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito delivered an unprecedented speech via radio broadcast. For the first time, the Japanese people heard their emperor's voice directly announcing the acceptance of the terms of surrender. World War II finally ended officially after Japan signed the surrender document on September 2, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri. But the end of the war did not mean an immediate end to the suffering. Millions of people still lived in refugee camps. Cities were razed to the ground. Infrastructure was crippled. Families searched for missing loved ones with uncertainty. Prisoners of war were slowly repatriated, while many children were orphaned and had to start their own lives in a world forever changed. 6 years of war had left deep scars. From Europe to Asia, nearly every family lost someone. But the biggest questions remained. Which country actually lost the most people? What were the total military and civilian casualties? What little-known facts about the victims of World War II? And how did this tragedy shape the modern world as we know it? 6 years of war finally ended. The sound of cannons faded. Warplanes no longer filled the skies. But as the smoke cleared, the world was confronted with a far more horrifying reality. Continents once dotted with great cities were now reduced to expanses of rubble. Millions of families searched for those who never returned. Thousands of villages vanished from the map. And beyond victory and defeat, nearly every nation bore the same scar: unprecedented human losses. So, which country suffered the greatest loss of life? In first place was the Soviet Union. According to the consensus of many modern historians, between 24 and 27 million people died. About a third were military personnel, while the rest were civilians who fell victim to battles, sieges, massacres, starvation, disease, and forced labor. There was hardly a family in the Soviet Union that did not lose a family member during the war. Next came China, with an estimated 15 to 20 million casualties. The vast majority were civilians. Many died not on the battlefield, but from starvation, disease, and the years-long destruction of infrastructure. Then there's Poland, which lost an estimated 5 to 6 million people. What makes this figure so tragic is the sheer proportion. Nearly a fifth of Poland's pre-war population was wiped out. Among them were approximately 3 million Polish Jews who were victims of the Holocaust. Germany alone is estimated to have lost around 6 to 7 million people, including both soldiers and civilians. By the end of the war, many major cities had been reduced to ruins by bombing and ground combat. Japan lost an estimated 2.5 to 3 million people, including military personnel and civilians, who fell victim to bombing, starvation, and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Other countries such as Yugoslavia, Romania, Hungary, France, Italy, Greece, the Philippines, and various parts of Southeast Asia also suffered significant casualties. No part of the world was completely immune from the effects of war. However, one fact is often forgotten. While in World War I the majority of casualties were soldiers, in World War II, civilians suffered the greatest loss of life. Hospitals were bombed. Schools were destroyed. Markets burned. Settlements became targets for air raids. Starvation became a weapon as deadly as bullets. World War II changed the way humans waged war. The line between battlefield and civilian life virtually disappeared. There's another, no less shocking fact. Many World War II casualties were never officially recorded. In remote villages, occupied territories, or in forced labor camps, millions of people died without clear identities. Because of this, historians continue to update estimates of the number of casualties to this day. This war also resulted in one of the largest refugee crises in modern history. After the war ended, tens of millions of people were forced to flee their homes. Some were displaced by changing borders, others fled the fighting, and still others lost their entire families. In Europe, cities like Berlin, Warsaw, and Stalingrad had to be rebuilt almost from scratch. In Asia, Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols and reminders of the power of nuclear weapons. From this tragedy, major changes were born. In 1945, the world formed the United Nations, hoping to prevent a conflict of this magnitude from happening again. International courts began to prosecute war crimes perpetrators. New conventions were drafted to protect civilians and prisoners of war. But the war also left another legacy. The world entered the Cold War, a nuclear arms race, and political rivalries that would last for decades. This meant that the end of World War II was not the end of global tensions, but rather the beginning of a new chapter in history. So, what were the actual casualties of World War II? The answer depends on the calculation method and the historical sources used. However, most modern research estimates the total number of casualties to be between 70 and 85 million. That figure includes soldiers, civilians, Holocaust victims, bombings, starvation, disease, forced labor, and those who died as a direct result of the war. Imagine all those victims standing side by side. The line of humanity would stretch almost unimaginably far. Behind every number is a name. Behind every name is a family, a dream, and a future that never came to fruition. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson of World War II. No war is ever truly won. Even the victors pay a terrible price. Cities can be rebuilt, economies can recover, but the millions of lives lost will never be returned. That's why historians continue to study this war, not to glorify it, but to understand how hatred, ambition, and fanaticism can lead the world to unprecedented disaster. The more we understand history, the better our chances of avoiding it. If you found this documentary insightful, please share your thoughts in the comments section. What do you think is the most important lesson humanity should learn from World War II? Don't forget to share this video so more people understand the value of peace. Because history isn't just for remembering, it's also for reminding us to prevent a tragedy of this magnitude from happening again.